She had been sleeping in the car wash for 3 months, not in any of the bays where the cars came through, not in any place that announced itself as a place where a person might sleep. In the small room at the back, behind the storage shelves where the cleaning chemicals were kept, and the spare chamois cloths were stacked in piles that nobody had reorganized since the business opened. The room had originally been designated as a storage annex on the building plans. The kind of space that gets built because the contractor needed somewhere to put a measurement that didn't fit anywhere else. A spatial leftover that the architect had not particularly thought about, and that the builder had constructed without opinion. It was narrow. The ceiling was lower on one side than the other, following the pitch of the roof outside. The walls were unpainted concrete block, the floor was sealed cement, and the whole space had the quality of somewhere that had been constructed to hold things rather than people. Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. Before we get into today's story, please take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now, let us begin. She had found it on her second week of working there. She had stayed late that evening to finish a truck that had come in at closing time, with 2 months of highway dust embedded in every surface, the kind of job that required full attention and could not be rushed without doing it badly, and she did not do things badly. When the truck was done and the forecourt was empty and the cleaning equipment was stowed, she had walked through the back of the building in the methodical way that she walked through every new environment, not for comfort or curiosity, but for inventory, to understand the full geometry of the space she was occupying, its edges and its possibilities, and the things it could be made to do beyond what it was currently being asked to do. She had found the room. She had tested the lock. It worked from the inside, which was the most important thing. She had found the tap in the adjacent bathroom, turned it on, waited for the water to change from cold to warm, and noted the time it took. She had found that the room was dry, which in a Johannesburg winter is the single most important structural quality a space can have, more important than size or light or any of the other qualities that people with more options use to evaluate the places they sleep. She had stood in the room for several minutes, running the calculation, what she needed, what was available, what the gap between those two things currently looked like, and what it would look like in 8 weeks and in 16, and she had made a decision. She told no one. She moved through the car wash from that evening onward, with the specific, calibrated presence of someone who has learned, over years and through necessity, to be fully there without leaving traces. She was first to arrive each morning, which she had to be, because arriving first meant she could complete her private routine, the folding away of the sleeping arrangement, the use of the bathroom, the restoration of the room to its storage room presentation, before any of her colleagues came through the front gate. She was last to leave each evening, staying visible and occupied until Sifo Ndaba, the manager, completed his last round and drove out through the security gate, and then waiting an additional 5 minutes in the narrow gap between the service entrance and the chemical storage, until the sound of his car had faded past the first intersection. The service entrance lock she had adjusted over 3 weeks of patient incremental work. Not broken, never broken. She had a principle about not breaking things that belong to other people, but encouraged, through the careful and repeated application of pressure in a specific direction, to develop a relationship with its frame that was more cooperative than the manufacturer had intended. The lock still looked locked. It simply was not if you knew exactly where to push. She did not think of any of this as dishonesty. She thought of it as the intelligent use of available resources in the service of a plan that was real and in progress, and had a specific timeline attached to it. She had always been a person who operated from plans. The plan had a name. She called it the room, because what she was working toward was a room, 2 rooms, a place with a kitchen and a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms, one for Akona and one for Kevin, with a door that locked from the inside because she had a door that locked and she knew what that was worth. She had the number she needed. She had a timeline. She had a current income and a current savings rate and a clear, cold-eyed calculation of how many weeks separated her from the number. And the number of weeks was manageable if she did not deviate from the plan, and the plan required her to not spend money on rent. And the storage room at the back of the car wash was, for the duration of the calculation, the most rational housing solution available to her. This was the situation she was managing, with precision and discipline and the particular grace of someone who has learned that grace is not something you receive when the circumstances permit it, but something you practice regardless of whether they do. On the morning that Mikhail Dlamini Vos arrived for his first day of work, her name was Thandi Mapofu, and everyone at the car wash called her Messi. The name had arrived on her first day, She had been assigned a silver bakkie, a commercial vehicle that had clearly been driven through the construction sites of the Free State for several months without once encountering a bucket, and she had addressed it the way she addressed every task that presented itself, with complete, focused, personal attention, as though the dirt on the vehicle was a problem that she had decided to resolve not because she was paid to, but because unresolved problems in her immediate environment were a thing she found difficult to tolerate. She had worked systematically, starting at the roof and moving down, using water and soap and a brush and a cloth, and, when the cloth was not sufficient, the specific kind of physical insistence that comes from someone who has decided that clean is a non-negotiable outcome. Lingelo, who had been at the car wash for 2 years and who had strong opinions about technique and execution and the correct approach to every vehicle type, had watched her from across the forecourt for 7 minutes without interrupting. Then he had turned to the man working beside him and said, in the tone of someone delivering a genuine assessment rather than a joke, that she moved like a striker who had taken something the opposing team did personally and was settling it through the vehicle of football rather than the vehicle of conversation. The name had circulated before the shift was over. She had decided she didn't mind it. Her ex-husband Bandiel had used her full name, Thandika, in the particular way of people who use the formal version of a name to signal ownership, to signal that they know the authoritative version of you and that this knowledge gives them a kind of access. After 4 years of that, she found she preferred the nickname. It was hers in the clean way that things are yours when you have been given them freely and with affection rather than claimed. Messy. She kept it. She was working under this name, in this forecourt, in the specific and ordinary heroism of a woman who has a plan and a timeline, and is executing both without complaint. On the morning that Mikhail arrived, she noticed him the way she noticed everything in her environment, not with focused attention, but with the automatic background processing of someone who has learned that environments contain information, and that the information is worth collecting even when you are not yet sure how it will be used. New. Being broken in by Lingelo, which meant the hierarchy was working normally. Moved with a particular quality she could not immediately categorize. She filed it and went back to the vehicle she was working on. Mikhail Delamini Voss had told his sister Zanella about the car wash plan on a Wednesday evening. He told her in the kitchen of the house he owned in Sandhurst, a house with 7 bedrooms and a wine cellar, and a garden that required a full-time groundskeeper, and a view that real estate agents described in the language of feelings rather than measurements, because the measurements alone did not explain the price. He told her in the calm, grounded, already decided tone that Zenil had learned over 31 years to recognize as the tone that indicated the decision had been made well before the conversation, and that the conversation was informational rather than consultative. Zenil set down her Rubos tea. You are going to work at a car wash. Yes, you. She looked at him carefully. The acting CEO of the largest logistics company in Johannesburg, who has a net worth that I am not going to say out loud in case the universe recalibrates. Thabo is managing operations. My involvement is advisory for the next quarter. That is not the part 1 I'm questioning. He told her about the pattern. He told her with the same flat, careful precision he used for business analysis, because the flat precision was the container in which he held things that had emotional content he was not yet ready to display in full. He told her about the 3 significant relationships over 7 years. He told her about the quality of attention that each had produced in its early stages, the specific warmth that wealth generates in people, not always consciously, not always strategically, but reliably, like a heat source that affects the temperature of the room regardless of whether anyone has consciously decided to be warm. He told her that he had spent 7 years in rooms where this warmth was present and had grown tired of not knowing what temperature the room would be without him in it. I want to be seen without it, he said. I want to meet someone who would make a decision about me that has nothing to do with what I represent, who would look at me and see a person rather than a context. Zane looked at him for a long time. That is the most romantic thing you have said to me in 31 years, she said. And also the most Nollywood. You understand that this ends in exactly one of 2 ways. Either you find nothing and come home having learned that car washers get tired and underpaid, or you find someone and then you have to tell her the truth and she is going to be very angry with you. I know. And there will be a period of estrangement, probably, and then a reconciliation involving a meaningful conversation in an emotionally resonant location. You're describing a film. I'm describing what happens when people with your level of romantic conviction make decisions, Zane said. I have been watching you make decisions for 31 years. I know the shape of them. He was quiet. When do you start? She said. Monday. She picked up her tea. God help whoever has to be your senior at this car wash. I mean that sincerely. They have no idea what is about to walk through their gate thinking it knows how to hold a shamos. My shamos technique is excellent. Your shamos technique is why I once said you looked like a professional car washer. I was insulting you. I know, but it gave me the idea. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she shook her head in the specific way she shook her head when she had decided that the situation was beyond her influence and that the only remaining option was to watch it unfold and be available for the aftermath. Fine, she said. Go wash cars, find your person, come home. Tell me everything. Thank you, Zara. Don't thank me. I'm not supporting this. I'm just not stopping it, which is different. Zanael Voss was 31 years old and had been the person who understood Michael for 17 years. Since she was 14, and their parents had moved to Cape Town for their father's work, and left Michael, 17, already running a small import operation out of his school locker, constitutionally resistant to supervision, in Johannesburg under her nominal guardianship, which had been her parents' assessment of the arrangement and not entirely her own. She had moved into the Sandhurst house 2 years ago, following the end of a relationship that had concluded badly and required a period of regrouping that she had initially estimated at 3 months and had extended, without formal announcement, into permanent. She had reorganized the household in the first month because she could not be in a household that was not well organized, and this one was not. She had restructured 2 service contracts in the second month because the existing terms were unfavorable. She had found a better housekeeper through a reputable agency and had negotiated the contract herself because Michael's approach to domestic negotiations was to accept the first number offered on the grounds that the time spent negotiating was worth more than what would be saved, which was correct from a pure time value analysis and completely ignored the principle of the thing. She ran her consulting work from the 3rd bedroom. She was present in the house most mornings and most evenings. She managed things. She was not a person who performed the managing. She was not someone who required acknowledgement for the managing, or who kept a running account of what the managing cost her. She managed because things needed managing, and she was the person in the immediate vicinity who was best equipped to do it, and that was, in her view, sufficient justification. This clarity about her own motivations was one of the things she was most confident about in herself, and also, on certain evenings when she sat with her tea and thought about the shape of her life, one of the things she was most complicated about. She had watched Michael's relationships with the unencumbered clarity available to someone who loves the person involved and has no stake in the outcome. She had watched each relationship produce the same particular quality of attention, the heightened warmth, the careful interest, the calibration of self-presentation against the variable of his wealth. And she had watched each one end with Michael looking like a man who has confirmed a suspicion he had hoped would prove wrong. She did not blame the women. She understood the structural logic of the calculation. What she minded was what the repeated confirmation did to her brother, the way each ending left him slightly more certain of a belief about himself that was not, she knew, the full truth. He was not unlovable. He was extraordinarily lovable if you could see him without everything else in the way. The question was whether the car wash would provide conditions in which the everything else could be, temporarily and sufficiently, removed. She hoped so. She also prepared, with characteristic practicality, for the period of estrangement she had accurately predicted. He arrived on Monday morning in a short-sleeved shirt, shorts, and Crocs. Zanael had been at the bottom of the stairs when he came down. She had looked at the outfit with the expression she reserved for things that were not worth the energy of a full response, but that she felt obligated to note for the record. "You look," she said, "like someone who has suffered a specific financial catastrophe and is bravely continuing to present themselves in public. That's somewhat the intended impression. You look like you have had to sell several things. Good. The Crocs are too much. Nobody wears Crocs ironically, they just wear them. That's the point. Michael, I need to go or I'll be late for my first day." He went out the door. She stood in the hallway and addressed her remarks to the closed door, which was a thing she had done many times before and which had approximately the same effect on Michael's decisions as addressing them to him directly. The car wash sat at a busy intersection in a part of Johannesburg that the city's development economics had assessed, across multiple cycles of investment and disinvestment, as peripheral, close enough to the productive center to be useful for services, far enough from it to be ignored for everything else. It received a steady flow of vehicles from the surrounding mixed-use area, commercial transport, the daily cars of the adjacent suburbs, the occasional taxi that arrived during slow periods, and produced negotiations over price that Sifo and Daba handled with the weary patience of someone who has had this particular negotiation several hundred times and has learned that it always ends in the same place, which is not where the taxi driver started. Sifo was 43 years old. He had owned the car wash for 11 years. Having purchased it with money saved over the preceding decade in vehicle maintenance and bodywork, and had spent the 11 years since building it into something that produced a consistent and modest income and required his daily presence, which was a quality of the business he had initially experienced as a limitation and had eventually come to understand as a different kind of thing. The quality of being genuinely needed somewhere, every day, which is not nothing. He assessed Michael on the first morning with the instinct he had developed for character over 11 years of employing people who came with varied histories and presented themselves with varying accuracy. The assessment took 20 minutes and produced a conclusion he did not yet have sufficient evidence to justify formally, but that his instinct had no doubts about. This man was not what his employment paperwork said he was. The paperwork said general laborer, previous experience in vehicle maintenance, no fixed address currently pending relocation. The paperwork was technically not false in any particular that Sifo could identify. It was just not the whole picture. The whole picture was something different and larger, and Sifo was going to watch it for a while before he decided what to do with his conclusion. He said nothing. He was good at watching. Lungelo communicated the terms of the hierarchy in the first 5 minutes. He was a man who believed that institutional knowledge conferred genuine authority, that the authority had to be established clearly at the outset of any new working relationship, and that the establishment required complete attention. He spoke for 4 minutes without interruption, covering the hierarchy, the protocols for different vehicle types, the forecourt territories, the brake schedule, the informal arrangement with the chemical supplier that was not discussed in front of management, and the general operating principle that new staff demonstrated their suitability by doing what they were told without commentary. The first customer of the morning was a man in a grey Fortuner who sat in his car on his phone for the entirety of the wash and did not look up once. Lungelo assigned Michael to the passenger side and took the driver's side himself, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this particular motion 10,000 times and whose body no longer requires instruction from his mind to complete it. Michael watched Lungelo from across the bonnet. He watched the specific economy of the movements, how nothing was wasted, how each motion completed itself fully before the next one began, how the sequence had been refined over 2 years of repetition into something that was, by its own practical standard, elegant. He tried to match it. He was not matching it. He was slower and less certain, and his chamois was leaving streaks on the passenger window that Lungelo would identify and comment on in approximately 30 seconds. 20 seconds. Your chamois, Lungelo said, without looking up from the door panel he was working on. I see it. Do you see it, or do you see that there is a problem in that general area? I see the streaks. The streaks are because you are going in 2 directions. Pick a direction, commit to it. Go in that direction until the panel is done, then reassess. Michael looked at the chamois. He went in 1 direction. The streaks improved. Better, Lungelo said. Not good. Better. I appreciate the distinction. You should. Good takes time. Better is what we're working toward today. The Fortuner man got out of his car when they were finished and looked at the vehicle for approximately 4 seconds. He handed Lungelo the money, the exact amount, no tip, the kind of payment that communicates that the service has been received and that no relationship has been formed, and got back in and drove away. Michael watched the car leave. He didn't look at us, he said. They don't, Lungelo said. Not most of them. He was already moving toward the next vehicle in the queue, a white sedan that had been waiting for 12 minutes, and whose driver, by contrast, got out and greeted Lungelo by name and asked about his mother's knee. Better today, mister. Kumalo says thank you, Lungelo said, and took the keys and began the assessment with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what this car usually needed and was checking for anything that had changed since last time. Michael watched this exchange too. He filed both of them, the man who didn't look and the man who asked about the knee, and thought about what they each communicated about how the same place could feel completely different depending on which one you were and what you had decided the people around you were worth. He picked up the chamois and went to work on the sedan. By noon, he had washed 7 vehicles, received 11 pieces of specific technical feedback from Langello, all of which were accurate, and had developed a comprehensive new respect for the physical demands of work that the people who paid for it never thought about. His lower back had opinions. His shoulders had stronger opinions. His hands, accustomed to keyboards and steering wheels and handshakes, were communicating a range of feelings about chamois work that he had not anticipated. He did not mention any of this to Langello. At lunch, he sat on the low wall at the back of the forecourt, with the food he had brought from home, a container of rice and chicken that Zanil had packed without comment, which was her way of supporting something she disagreed with, and watched the street. A woman walked past with a child on her back and 2 bags in her hands and a phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder, conducting a conversation in Zulu that he could not follow but that had the quality of someone managing 3 separate problems simultaneously. She did not slow down. She moved through the block at the pace of someone who has calculated exactly how much time this journey takes and has no margin to give away. He watched her until she turned the corner. Then he ate his rice and thought about the calculation. About all the calculations, the ones happening in the street and in the forecourt and in the back rooms of buildings all across this city. The ones that nobody was tracking and nobody was accounting for and nobody was going to include in any quarterly report. Langello sat down beside him. He had his own food, a kota, eaten with the efficiency of someone on a schedule. He did not comment on Mikhail's lunch. "Your chamois is still too wet," Langello said. "I'm working on it," Mikhail said. "Wring it more, completely. What feels like completely is not completely. Go further than feels right, and then go a little further." That is surprisingly philosophical advice. Langello looked at him sideways. "It's chamois' advice," he said. "Don't make it something else." "Understood." They ate in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that develops between people who have been doing physical work in the same space and have arrived at the same point of quiet. "Why did you come here?" Langello asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious, the way people get genuinely curious when something doesn't quite add up and they are deciding whether to ask about the gap. Mikhail thought about the answer. He thought about the honest answer, and the approximate answer, and the answer that was true without being complete. "I needed a change of environment," he said. Langello looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has heard an answer that is probably not the full story but is not going to push it. "Okay," he said. "Eat your food." Mikhail ate his food. He picked up the chamois and went to work on the sedan. By noon, he had washed 7 vehicles, received 11 pieces of specific technical feedback from Langello, all of which were accurate, and had developed a comprehensive new respect for the physical demands of work that the people who paid for it never thought about. His lower back had opinions. His shoulders had stronger opinions. His hands, accustomed to keyboards and steering wheels and handshakes, were communicating a range of feelings about chamois work that he had not anticipated. He did not mention any of this to Langello. Mikhail listened to all of it with complete patient attention. "I understand," he said. "You don't interrupt while I'm still talking. I apologize. I thought you had finished. I was considering whether I had finished. I see. Please continue." Langello looked at him with the suspicion that gracious deference produces in people who are accustomed to deference being withheld. He put the suspicion aside and put Mikhail to work on a sedan that needed comprehensive attention. Mikhail washed it with focused, systematic care. Langello watched for a while and then told him 3 things that needed to be done differently, all of which were correct, and all of which Mikhail accepted without argument. The first week taught Mikhail things that had no equivalent in his previous experience. He learned that the informal economy of the forecourt, the rounding of prices, the small adjustments, the system of favors and debts that supplemented the formal wage structure, was more sophisticated and more stable than it appeared, maintained by an unwritten code of mutual understanding that everyone participated in and no one acknowledged directly. He observed it without comment. He learned that the physical work was harder than he had anticipated and more satisfying than he had expected. There was something in the completion of it, the before and after of a vehicle, the visible, unambiguous evidence of what had been done, that his usual work did not produce. His usual work produced reports and analyses and strategic outcomes that unfolded over quarters and fiscal years and were measurable only in the aggregate. The car wash produced clean cars. This was, he found, more immediately gratifying than he would have predicted. He learned on the 3rd day that Thandi Mapofo, who was the fastest worker on the forecourt by a margin that was not close, who moved with the precise efficiency of someone for whom wasted motion was a kind of failure, who spoke to the customers with the exact minimum of interaction required to complete the transaction, no more, no less, slept in the back room. He had stayed late on a pretext. He had watched the service entrance. The light had come on at 7:43. He had stood on the dark forecourt and looked at the thin line of light under the door for a long time, long enough to understand what he was looking at, and long enough to know that he was not going to do anything with the information yet. He went home. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about the storage room and the lock she had adjusted, and the morning arrivals that were always first, and the evening departures that were always last, and the plan she had mentioned in passing about a room and a timeline and children in Soweto. He thought about the number she was working toward, and what the gap currently looked like, and what it would look like in 8 weeks. He did the calculation. He understood the arithmetic. He also understood that the arithmetic was not the point. The point was that here was a person managing something this large, with this much precision, and this much quiet dignity, and not a single person in the forecourt had any idea. He had been paying attention for 3 days, and he had only figured it out because he had stayed late on purpose. He did not tell anyone. Not yet. He was still working out the shape of what he wanted to do, and how he wanted to do it in a way that would be acceptable to her, which he had already assessed, accurately, would be the most complicated part of the whole equation. On the 6th day, Bandil came. She saw him from across the forecourt. She had 4 seconds, and she used them to make a decision. She had been making this decision in various forms since she was 19 years old. The decision about whether to retreat from the space or to hold it. She had learned early that retreating from spaces invited the belief that the spaces were available for others to occupy on their terms, and she had decided, not as a philosophy but as a practical operating principle, that she was going to occupy every space she was in on her own terms until someone could give her a compelling reason to do otherwise. No one had managed it yet. She held her ground. Bandil was wearing the careful outfit he wore when he was trying to produce an impression. Pressed trousers, a good shirt, the shoes he kept in their original box. He had the walk she had memorized against her will over 4 years, the deliberate stride of a man who believes his intentions restructure whatever environment he moves through. He spoke to her with the particular register she recognized as his opening position in negotiations he had already decided the outcome of. He was not overtly rude. He was the specific kind of rude that operates below the threshold of what can be directly objected to, the tone that diminishes without offering itself for challenge, that communicates hierarchy through implication rather than declaration. Michael appeared. She had not seen him move. She became aware of him when he was already there, positioned between her and Bandili, with the calm, grounded stillness of someone who had assessed what the situation required and had provided it without drama or announcement. He spoke to Bandili. The conversation was brief and not particularly dramatic, but it had a quality of clarity that did not admit misinterpretation. Bandili left. She stood on the forecourt in the quiet that followed. "That was not your concern," she said. "You're right," he said. "You didn't have to involve yourself." "No, then why did you?" He looked at her directly. "Because he put his hands near you, and I couldn't watch him do that." She looked at him for the full, assessing, committing to nothing look. It lasted a long time. He did not look away, and he did not fill the silence with anything. "Thank you," she said. Then she went back to the vehicle she had been working on. She thought about the way he had said I couldn't watch him do that for the rest of the afternoon. Not I wouldn't, which would have been a moral position, a decision. I couldn't, which was a different thing, which was honesty about what his body had decided before his mind had been consulted. She filed this with the other things she had been collecting about him. The weeks that followed had a quality she tried not to name too specifically, because naming things prematurely was how you ended up committed to a version of events that hadn't finished revealing itself. He showed up every day. This was the most fundamental fact, and the one she returned to most consistently when she found herself assessing the situation. He showed up, without exception, without drama, without the performance of showing up. He worked. He was not technically gifted in the way that Langelo was technically gifted, and Langelo told him so regularly and with considerable animation, and Mikhail absorbed the feedback with the patient equanimity of someone for whom the feedback was useful rather than threatening. He found ways to be near her without requiring the nearness to produce anything. He was in the forecourt when she was in the forecourt. He was in the break room when she went to the break room. Not in the way of following, but in the way of two people with similar rhythms in the same space. The way water finds level through available pathways without anyone having directed it to. He listened. This was the thing that undid the calculation. Eventually, though she did not immediately identify it as the thing, he listened with the quality of someone for whom the information being offered was genuinely interesting rather than performatively received. He did not nod with the slightly over-emphatic nodding of people whose listening is designed to be visible. He was simply present, and the presence was the kind that creates the specific safety of feeling actually heard, which she had learned not to expect from men, and which was therefore more disorienting than the alternative would have been. She told him things. In pieces, across days, in the way information escapes when your attention is occupied, defending a different perimeter. She told him about the children, a Connor, 4 years old, who assessed every new situation with the careful, systematic thoroughness of someone who had learned that environments contained rules and that the rules were worth establishing before you committed to existing in them. Kevin, 2.5, who processed the world primarily through motion and had an inexhaustible commitment to running. She told him about Bongiwe, her cousin, who had the children now and who was good to them, who was generous and patient and whose house was safe. She told him about the plan, the room, the timeline, the specific number she was working toward, and the specific number of weeks between her and it. She told him about Bandile. Not all of it, not in sequence, in the way that the worst experiences get told. Sideways, in pieces, the edges of them before the center, the details before the shape. Secondary school and the promises that had sounded like certainty and turned out to be intention without infrastructure. The marriage and the children and the women Bandile had brought to the house with the confidence of someone who had genuinely never developed a working understanding of consequences. I was very young, she said. Very young and very naive. Young, he said. Same thing, not the same thing. He said it without weight, not as an argument, as a distinction that mattered to him. Young means you were working with the information available to you at the time, which is all any of us are ever doing. She looked at him. That is a very kind way to say it. It's an accurate way to say it. She went back to the car she was working on. She thought about the distinction he had made between young and naive, between insufficient information and insufficient judgment for the rest of the day, and intermittently for several days afterward, with the particular quality of returning to something that has shifted your understanding of yourself without your having asked it to. Zanail came on a Thursday afternoon. She came because she had decided she was going to come, and the decision had been made in the face of Mikhail's explicit and repeated instruction that she was not to come, which was the kind of instruction that Zanail received, acknowledged, and then evaluated independently on its merits. The merits in this case were as follows. Mikhail had been going to the car wash for 3 weeks. He had come home each evening with the specific quality of restrained animation that she recognized as his state when something important was happening that he was not yet ready to talk about. He had been on his phone more than usual in the evenings. He had twice forgotten what he had come into a room for, which was something he did not do, his spatial memory being one of the more reliable features of an otherwise complicated operating system. She needed to see for herself. This was a principle she applied consistently and without apology. She arrived at the wrong moment in the specific and entirely predictable way that arriving at the wrong moment tends to be predictable to everyone except the person arriving. She came through the gate in the car, and with the presentation that were natural to her, and Thandi, who was working on a bakkie near the entrance, and who missed very little about her immediate environment, looked up and registered the new arrival, and then looked at Mikkel, and then looked at the car, and then looked back at Mikkel with an expression that was doing significant and rapid internal processing. Thandi finished the section of the bakkie she was working on. She put down the cloth. She walked to the back of the building without speaking to anyone. Mikhail followed. She was standing in the storage room with her arms at her sides, in the particular stillness of someone who is completing a significant internal calculation. That's your sister, she said. Yes, you're not a car washer. No, what are you? He told her everything. Not in the compressed, tactical way of someone managing a disclosure, but fully and in sequence, the way you tell the truth when the truth is overdue and the only thing left to manage is how clearly you tell it. The company, what it was and what it did and what it was worth in terms that communicated the scale without requiring him to say the number directly. The pattern of the relationships, the decision to come to the car wash, what he had been looking for and what he had found and why he had been afraid to tell her and why the fear had been wrong and why he was sorry. She listened to all of it without expression. She stood with her arms at her sides and her face doing its minimum and her eyes doing everything, and she let him finish without interruption. "You listened to everything I told you," she said, "about Bandile, about the children, about the room and the plan and the number I'm working toward." She paused. "You let me tell you my whole life, and you were holding yours back." "Yes. Are you sorry because I'm angry?" "Because I was wrong," he said. "You had a right to accurate information about who you were talking to. I prioritized my fear of losing what we had over your right to that information. That was wrong, and I am sorry for it." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought she might not say anything else, might simply indicate, through silence, that the conversation was over and the decision had been made. "Leave me alone for now," she said. "I need to think." He left. She thought for 3 weeks. She did this with the same systematic, unhurried thoroughness she applied to every important calculation, because important calculations deserve the full attention and the full time they required, and shortcuts in important calculations were how you ended up in situations you had not adequately evaluated. She examined each variable separately and then in relation to the others. She examined the car wash weeks. 5 weeks of a man showing up every day in Crocs, being supervised by Lungello on his chamois technique, receiving feedback about the forecourt territories, washing cars in the Johannesburg summer heat, doing all of this without complaint and without performance. Nobody performed this. Nobody sustained this level of ordinary, undramatic commitment for 5 weeks as a performance. The commitment was real, the discomfort was real, the chamois technique was real, and it was poor, and it had been genuinely poor, rather than deliberately poor, which meant he had not cheated even on the performance of the ordinary life, which would have been the easy and undetectable shortcut. She examined the way he listened, the specific quality of it, present, unhurried, interested, without agenda. She had told him things she had not told anyone in this city, not because she had decided to tell him, but because the quality of his listening had created conditions in which the telling happened naturally. This was rare. She had met few people in her life who listened with this quality, and she knew it when she encountered it. She examined the moment with Bandile, not the outcome. The outcome was simply that Bandile had left, but the quality of the decision that preceded it. He had not consulted her. He had assessed the situation, determined what it required, and provided it, and then returned to his side of the forecourt when it was done. He had not required gratitude or acknowledgement. He had not turned the intervention into a transaction, had not established it as something she owed him. He had simply done it and then been in the forecourt, washing a car. She examined the question about school, the specific certainty of "I know that too." Not encouragement, not the kind, empty affirmation of someone who has decided that encouragement is socially appropriate, but the certainty of someone who had been paying attention to her and had arrived at a conclusion through evidence. He had watched her work for 5 weeks. He had listened to her talk for 5 weeks. He had formed an opinion about her capability from observation, and the opinion was accurate, and he had stated it with the confidence of accurate opinion. She examined what she felt when she thought about his face. This was the examination she had left for last, because it was the one with the most potential to distort the others if she consulted it too early. She examined it now, fully and honestly, and found that what she felt when she thought about his face was not complicated at all. It was actually the simplest thing in the entire calculation. It was the thing that, once she had fully examined it, made the rest of the calculation considerably easier. At the end of 3 weeks, she came to the house. She came for the job. This was real, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She was clear about this with herself on the walk from the bus stop, and she was clear about it when the door opened. She introduced herself to Zanail and stated her qualifications and her availability and her expectation of terms, and she was direct and professional, and she did not look in the direction of the interior of the house more than was necessary to confirm its general layout. Zanail looked at her for a moment with an expression that was simultaneously assessing a domestic employment situation and something considerably more complicated, doing both at once with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been managing multiple simultaneous assessments for 31 years. "Come in," she said. The house was large in the way that houses are large when the size has been thought about, when the rooms are sized for the way people actually use rooms, when the light has been placed where light is useful, when the proportions communicate that someone understood that space is not neutral, but carries its own argument about what matters. She processed it quickly, the way she processed all environments, noting what worked and what didn't, and what could be made to work with adjustment. The kitchen she found immediately. It was large, well-equipped, and organized in the haphazard way of a kitchen where significant money had been spent on tools and no equivalent thought had been applied to the question of where the tools should live in relation to how the kitchen was actually used. She stood in it for a moment, then she reorganized it. She was aware as she did this that she had not been asked to. She did it anyway because the alternative, being in a kitchen that was not organized correctly, was not something she was capable of, in the same way that some people are not capable of ignoring a door that is not fully closed. Zanail found her in the middle of the reorganization and watched for a moment from the doorway. "I want you to know something," Zanail said. "What my brother did, the whole thing, it came from who he is, not from strategy. He wanted to be known before he was understood, and then he found you, and he was afraid. And fear made him wait too long to tell you the truth. The fear was real. The mistake was real. The thing under both of them was also real. And I was placing spices in an order that made functional sense. I'm thinking about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking," Zanail said. She left the doorway. Vandy stood in the kitchen of the Sandhurst house and thought, not for the first time that week, about a man who had washed cars for 5 weeks in Crocs because he wanted to be known before he was understood. The weeks in the house had a quality unlike anything in her recent experience. The house was warm and large and quiet in the mornings when Zanail was working and Mikhail was out, and she worked in it with the focused, precise efficiency she brought to all work, and the work was good and the conditions were good, and she was, by the objective measure of her current circumstances, better situated than she had been 3 weeks ago. This was the practical layer, and it was real. The other layer was also real and more complicated, and she attended to it carefully. Mikhail was in the house most evenings. He moved through it with the same quality she had noticed in the forecourt, present without demanding, available without performing availability. He was in the kitchen sometimes when she was working there, and he did not fill the space with the requirement to be managed. He spoke when there was something to say and was quiet when there wasn't. She found herself, over the evenings, in conversations that arrived without being planned. He asked her about the children, not as a courtesy, as genuine interest, with follow-up questions that demonstrated he had remembered what she had said before and was building on it rather than starting fresh each time. He asked about Akona specifically, about the quality of attention she had described, the systematic way the child approached new situations. "She sounds like you," he said one evening. "She's going to be better than me," Vandai said. "I don't doubt it." He paused. "She also sounds like someone who is going to require very honest answers to very direct questions when she's old enough to ask them." "Yes," Vandy said. "I am prepared for that." "Are you though?" She looked at him. "What is that question?" "Just, some of the direct questions are going to be about her father and about the choices made around him, and the answers are going to be complicated." "I know that. I'm just saying." He paused. "I think you handle complicated things better than almost anyone I've ever met. I think you will handle those conversations exactly as well as they need to be handled. I'm not worried about it." She looked at him for the full, assessing look. He met it with the same even patience he had demonstrated in the forecourt when she had first applied the look to him. "Why are you not worried about it?" she said. "Because I've been watching you for almost 2 months, and I have not yet seen you handle anything less well than it needed to be handled." She went back to what she was doing. She carried the weight of what he had said through the rest of the evening and into the next morning, and for several days after, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple, and simple things that are also true take time to fully absorb. She brought the children on a Friday 3 weeks after she started working at the house. Akona arrived and conducted, over the course of 45 minutes, a comprehensive assessment of the ground floor. She moved from room to room with the deliberateness of someone establishing the rules of a new environment before committing to existing in it, testing doors, examining heights, noting the spatial relationship between rooms. She found the kitchen and assessed it. She found the garden and assessed it. She found the room that Zanel used as an office and looked through the doorway for a moment before concluding that it was not relevant to her current inquiry. Kevin arrived and ran in a circle. The circle was large. The house accommodated the circle without difficulty, which Kevin appeared to find satisfying. He ran another circle to confirm. Michael came home at 6 o'clock to find Akona in the kitchen doorway eating something and examining him with the careful attention of a child who has learned that new adults require assessment and that the assessment should be thorough. He crouched to her level. "Hello. Hello." She looked at him without blinking. "Are you the car wash man?" "I was for a while. My mum said you worked at the car wash." I did, but you don't now. No. So what do you do now? I run a company. She considered this. What kind of company? Logistics, moving things from one place to another. Like a delivery man? More complicated than one delivery man? Many delivery men? Oh, she said. She seemed to find this an acceptable answer. Kevin is in the garden. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, she said, with the formal courtesy of someone who had been taught manners and was applying them accurately. He stood up and caught Thandi's eye across the kitchen. She was standing near the stove, and her face was doing its minimum, but her eyes were doing something that he recognized as the equivalent, in the Thandi Mapofu language of expression, of smiling. They played football in the back garden in the late afternoon. The game had no conventional structure. Akona had a strategy that she was executing independently of the other players. Kevin was executing a strategy that consisted entirely of running at the ball as hard as possible regardless of direction. And Michael was navigating between these two approaches while nominally attempting to maintain something resembling a game. Thandi came out to call them for dinner and was immediately conscripted onto Kevin's team, which she joined with the visible ambivalence of someone who had intended to remain a non-participant and had been outmaneuvered by a 2.5-year-old. She landed badly on her right ankle 20 minutes later, catching the edge of the garden step while backing away from an enthusiastic Kevin. She sat down on the step. Michael was beside her in a moment, and the efficiency with which he appeared, not rushing, not performing concern, simply being there with the directness of someone who had assessed that this was where he should be, was a thing she noted and filed with the other things she had been filing about him. She sat on the step with the ankle elevated on a folded towel. Michael sat beside her. The children had been redirected inside by Zanel. The garden was quiet in the specific temporary way of gardens that have recently contained children. How does it feel? He said. Better. Neither of them said anything for a moment. You asked me something, she said. Some time ago. I've asked you a lot of things. The most important one. He was very still. The garden was very quiet. I'll marry you, she said. The stillness lasted 2 full seconds. Then, you're serious? Look at my face, Mikkel. He looked at her face. He looked at it for a long time, reading it the way he had learned to read it over 2 months of paying close attention. It was her face, clear, unhurried, holding everything without performing any of it, and it was committed. The assessing look had committed, fully and finally, to something. Yes, he said, you're serious. I chose the car wash you, she said. I need you to be clear about that. Not this house, not the company, not anything that comes with them. The man who showed up every day and washed cars and stood between me and Bandile without being asked and listened to me like what I was saying actually mattered. That is the man I am saying yes to. The rest of it I will manage because I manage things. But that is who I chose. I understand it, he said. Do you? Yes. You didn't need me. You had a plan. You were executing the plan. You were going to be fine. Yes, and you chose me anyway. From that position, he paused. That is the most important thing anyone has ever done for me. She looked at him. Don't make it too significant. I'm a woman who makes practical decisions. I know, and this is a practical decision. Is it? Yes, you are a good person who pays attention and shows up. These are practical qualities in a partner. They are, he agreed. Also, I love you. Is that practical? It helps, she said. I love you, Thandi. I know, she said. I love you too. That is also a practical fact. He laughed, the real laugh, surprised out of him. She allowed herself, watching him laugh, the specific feeling she had been careful with, which was the feeling of being completely in the right place, at the right time, with the right person, for reasons that were simple and true and required no further examination. Can I be happy now? He said. Outwardly. Quietly, she said. The children are inside. He was happy, quietly, in the garden, in the last of the afternoon light, with his serious, practical, completely decided fiancée beside him, and in the house behind them 2 children who were going to need dinner and would have opinions about what kind of dinner, and his sister who was almost certainly in the kitchen listening with the attentiveness of someone who had been waiting for this exact outcome and was going to have thoughts about it tomorrow morning over Rubo's tea. He sat in the garden and was happy, and the happiness was simple, and it was the right size for the moment, which was exactly the right size for everything. Langelo found out 3 weeks after the engagement, through his cousin's friend who had a business social media account, and who had tagged him in a photograph from an industry publication, CEO Voss Logistics, at the Johannesburg Infrastructure Summit, with the annotation, "Is this not your car wash guy?" Langelo looked at the photograph for a long time. He called Mikhail. The call was, by mutual later assessment, one of the better phone calls either of them had had in recent memory. "What?" Langelo said. "Hello, Langelo." "No." "What?" "I can explain. You washed cars. You came in every morning. You let me tell you about the chamois. Do you understand what I am telling you? I told you about the chamois. Your chamois instruction was very good." "My chamois instruction was given to a man who runs a logistics company." The instruction was still very good. A long silence, during which Langelo was clearly conducting an internal review of the entirety of their professional relationship from the new perspective of this information. "You grabbed the cloth when I told you to grab the cloth," Langelo said. "You were my senior. It was appropriate to follow your direction. You held it when I told you to hold it." "Yes, even when I know for a fact that you did not agree with the holding. I deferred to your institutional knowledge." Another silence. When Langelo spoke again, his voice had taken on the careful quality of someone who has processed a complicated situation and arrived, on reflection, at respect. "Okay," he said. "Okay. That is actually the most professional thing I have ever heard of a CEO doing. Thank you. I still think your chamois technique was the worst I have ever seen on this forecourt, including the guy who came in on his third day. I accept that. Congratulations on the marriage thing. She is serious, that one. I hope you know that." "I know. She will not have patience for anything less than completely serious." "I know," Michael said. "That is why I chose her." Bandiel Sithole made a final appearance 6 weeks after the engagement. He arrived at the Sandhurst house on a Saturday morning, having obtained the address through Bongwe, whose resolve under sustained questioning had never been her strongest quality. He rang the bell. He was admitted. He walked into the kitchen. Van Dijk was there. She was cooking. She had a wooden spoon in her hand in the way of someone who had not yet put it down, and who in the event of an unannounced visit from her ex-husband was not going to. Van Dijk spoke. He had things to say about the house and what it represented, and what he felt he was entitled to understand about how she had arrived in it. He said these things in the circling, incremental way he had always used when approaching something he wanted, but had not yet decided how to ask for directly. She let him finish. She gave him the full courtesy of her attention without interruption, which was the kind of courtesy that has nothing warm about it and everything precise. Then she told him, clearly and without rancor, exactly how things were arranged, exactly what he was entitled to, and exactly what he was going to do next. She told him that his role in the children's lives was defined by the agreement they had reached in mediation, and that the agreement was sufficient, and that she had no intention of revising it in any direction. She told him that this house and everything in it was not his concern, and that his interest in it was not something she was going to address. She told him that he was going to leave now. He said, "I hope you're happy." He meant it with an edge. It did not land with an edge, it landed flat. Because Thandi was not a person who could be reached by the suggestion that her happiness was a point against her. "I am," she said. "Goodbye, Bandiel." He left. Mikkel came into the kitchen 10 minutes later. She was stirring something on the stove with the focused, methodical rhythm of someone who has completed an administrative task and moved efficiently to the next one. "Was that him?" "Yes." "Are you all right?" "Completely." She paused. "Come and taste this. Tell me if it needs anything." He tasted it. He considered it honestly. "It's perfect," he said. "I know," she said. "I was checking that you have functioning taste. And you pass," she said. "You pass most things, actually. I thought you should know that." He stood in the kitchen and looked at her, at the lines of her, the steadiness of her, the quality of presence that she had had in the car wash and that she had here, in this kitchen, in this house that was becoming as much hers as it was anyone's, unchanged by any context, as real and as certain as she had been on the first morning he had watched her address a dirty vehicle as though clean was a moral position. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "Now stop standing there and do something useful. Those children are going to be hungry in an hour." He did something useful. The children were not hungry in an hour. The kitchen was warm and the house was full, and outside the Johannesburg evening was doing what Johannesburg evenings do, which is to arrive with the particular quality of light and settling sound that suggests the city has decided, for tonight at least, to be generous. The wedding was in the garden of the Sandhurst house on a Saturday in October, when the jacarandas in the suburb were doing the thing they did in October, the purple that fell on Johannesburg like a decision the city had made to be beautiful regardless of everything else. 90 people. Music that Langelo had curated with more investment and more genuine taste than anyone had anticipated, which produced a playlist that was, by objective measure, the correct playlist. Food from a caterer that Zanel had found after 3 weeks of research conducted with the rigor of someone for whom catering research was a form of love. A corner as the flower girl, distributing petals with the systematic precision of a child who had calculated the optimal spatial distribution and was executing it with full commitment. Kevin as the ring bearer, who had held the rings with the concentrated seriousness of a child performing a significant task, and who had, upon completing the walk down the aisle, run a small celebratory circle before Zanel redirected him. Zanel gave a speech. She had written it over 4 weeks, revising it on the evenings when the revision felt important and setting it aside on the evenings when distance seemed more useful than proximity. She spoke about her brother, about watching him over 7 years make the same journey toward the same disappointment, and about what it had looked like when that changed. She spoke about the first time she had seen Thandi on the forecourt of a car wash, and about what she had seen there. She spoke about the kitchen reorganized on the first afternoon, without being asked, without announcement. She spoke about what it meant to find someone who chose you from a position of capability, who had a plan and was executing the plan, and made room for you inside it, not out of need, but out of genuine, considered decision. She raised her glass. To my brother, she said, who went to a car wash to find someone who would know him without everything else. And to Thandi, who found him there, and saw him clearly, and chose him anyway. That is the most valuable thing that happens between two people. Clear sight. I hope you keep it. Thandi sat beside Michael in the garden and held his hand and thought about clear sight. The cruelest thing about people like Thandi is not what they survive. The surviving is remarkable, but surviving is something many people do given the alternative. The cruelest thing is how completely invisible the surviving is. How a woman can sleep in a back room at a car wash for 3 months, can wake before anyone arrives and be in uniform before anyone comes through the gate, can wash vehicles with systematic precision and save her money and work toward her plan, and can do all of this with such quiet efficiency that not a single person on the forecourt has any idea. She was doing something extraordinary in the ordinary language of a work uniform and a chamois cloth. She was managing something enormous with the full capacity of her intelligence and her discipline and her considerable organizational capability, and she was managing it without complaint and without announcement and without the expectation that anyone would notice. Most of us would have driven past, not because we are unkind, because we have not developed the habit of looking, because the visible extraordinary, the dramatic gesture, the announced need, the conspicuous sacrifice has trained us to look for extraordinary in those registers, and the quiet extraordinary, the kind that happens in back rooms and early mornings and the careful adjustment of locks, does not produce the signals we have been trained to notice. Mikhail noticed. Not because he was exceptional, he was a man with ordinary human limitations and a poor chamois technique and a talent for deference that surprised even the people who knew him well. He noticed because he had come to the car wash specifically to pay attention to things that his usual environment made invisible, and because once you commit to paying that kind of attention you cannot easily stop. He paid attention to the woman washing cars with the focused intensity of someone who has made peace with what the work requires and has decided to do it completely. He paid attention to what she said and what she did not say and what her face communicated in the minimum expressions she allowed it. He paid attention over days and weeks until the picture that assembled itself was the full picture, the one that included the storage room and the plan and the children and the capacity and the pride and the choice she was making every morning to continue. That is the whole difference in many cases. Not intervention, not rescue, not the provision of resources that solve the problem from outside. Attention, patient, complete, sustained attention to the person in front of you as a full human being with a full history and a full interior life that is operating independently of whether you have noticed it. The people managing beautifully in the margins of your life are managing regardless of your attention. They do not need your notice to continue, but your notice, your genuine, unhurried, evidence-based notice, is the thing that makes possible what comes after the managing. The rest of it, the room that becomes a house, the house that becomes a home, the plan that completes and becomes the foundation of something else. Your attention is not charity, it is simply accuracy. It is simply seeing what is there. There is someone in your life right now who is doing exactly this, who is managing something this large in a space this small with this much grace, and who has not told you and who is not going to tell you, because they have learned through experience that telling costs more than it returns. They are the person who shows up, who does the work, who is first in and last out. Pay attention to them. Not to help them necessarily. They may not need help. They may have a plan and a timeline and a clear-eyed calculation of exactly how many weeks separate them from the number they need. Pay attention because they are there, because they are real, because the full picture of what they are doing is worth seeing, and because sometimes, when you pay attention to the right person in the right place at the right time, with the full, honest, unhurried quality of someone who has decided that the person in front of them is worth understanding before being understood, the rest of it becomes possible. The rest of it, whatever it turns out to be, becomes possible. If this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave us a comment. Wherever you are watching from tonight, thank you for being here. Take care of each other out there. We will see you in the next story.